Okay, so depending upon the brokerage that you have selected, if you're using a brokerage, you may have CQG or Rhythmic or what are the other ones? Continuum. Now, if you're using a simulated account, if you just have the free version of NinjaTrader, then you may simply have the trial from CQG. All right, so I'm going to show you how to set up a couple of different data feeds. It's very simple, but we're going to finish up with Kinetic and IQ feed because those are the two data feeds that give you access to continuous contracts. Okay, but typically you'll have CQG from Ninja as the free, I think it's a 2-week trial. So you go to Tools from the Control Center, Tools, Account Connections, and by default, you won't have these other account connections. I've reinstalled Ninja in the prior video simply for showing you how to do that, but by default, I believe you only have the external data feed, the Kinetic end of day for free, the market replay connection, and the simulated data feed. So if you need to simply just have bars on the chart so that you can test an indicator or license an indicator or anything like that, if you're using the toolbar or the Divergences Pro, you need to have bars on the chart. You have to have data available to be able to license everything and to be able to test and make sure that it works. So if you have no other access to any other data feed, then you can simply connect to the Kinetic end of day. And I'll just show you how to do that now since we're talking about it. You simply go to File, Connect, and then select the Kinetic end of day. And that will give you daily data for, I think, all of the futures contracts and all of the stocks. So you can have access to end of day data for a number of different instruments here. For instance, the Dow Jones. And let's set that to a daily chart. I'm adding a chart template here, but we'll go over that in a separate video. And there you have 365 days of daily bars for the Dow Jones. Okay, so that's just the free Kinetic end of day data feed. But what I want to do is disconnect from that and then show you how to run just a couple of different connections and go over the different options that you have here. So we go, first of all, let me do that more slowly. We go to Tools, Account Connections, and then you'll click on the Add button. Okay, so it's asking you to create a new connection here. You go to Next, and these are all of the different providers. You may have an account with Interactive Brokers that gives you access to minute data. You may have the free data feed from CQG that Ninja gives you, or I believe with their brokerage, they give you Rhythmic or Continuum. I'm not using the free one for the brokerage. I'm also I have an account with the NinjaTrader brokerage, but I'm using Continuum just for the connection for the order routing. Okay, I'm actually signed up with Kinetic, which I think is a little more high quality data. Kinetic and IQ feed seem to be about the best. I believe Kinetic is white labeled IQ feed data, but IQ feed is without a doubt the best data for NinjaTrader, but it's very pricey. So I'm not sure what their fee structures are with the Rhythmic data or Continuum. I want to say that Continuum is mostly for order routing, but I believe you can do Rhythmic or Continuum with the Ninja brokerage. But anyway, let's just go through the Continuum. And you have to put a name here, but you can name it Continuum. I already have this loaded. Connect on startup. I do not do that because there's an issue in the way that the charts load, the indicators load, and the data feeds load, the access to the data. And when you're connecting on startup and you're shutting down without connecting, you can you'll see a lot of issues with corrupted workspaces and XML files and stuff like that. Ninja 7 seems to have some issues with the XML files. All of your chart templates, your workspaces, things like that are all saved as .xml files. And when you connect on startup and you close without disconnecting, somehow those files can get corrupted. And if any of you know what I'm talking about, if your workspaces get corrupted, you can see some very bizarre behavior. Some of your indicators might just go missing. Some of your charts might go missing. You may not be able to open that workspace. You might get a lot of Ninja crashes and things like that. So as far as I'm concerned, it's best to not connect on startup. What you want to do is you want to open up Ninja. Depending on how many workspaces you have open, let those workspaces load, cycle through all of the workspaces, make sure all of the charts are loaded and all the indicators are loaded, and then connect to the data feed. And that will ensure that everything is done in an orderly sequence and you're not corrupting anything. Okay, obviously you want historical data, so that's an obvious one. If you have a backup data feed connection, you could select it, but I doubt many of you will have multiple data feeds. You may, but the only reason I have both Continuum and Kinetic is because Continuum is for the order routing and Kinetic is for the actual data that populates the charts, okay? So if we go to next, you simply add your username and password, and depending on whether this is a demo mode or not, obviously you would select this here. And do you want to include index data? I always select these two. And local order cancels order simulation. I believe if you check that, then your stops are not going to go into the exchange. I believe that's right. I need to double check on that actually, but I believe that if you select this box, that your stops will be sitting on this instance of NinjaTrader, but will not actually go into the exchange until they're hit. So if for some reason your power goes out, your internet goes down, and you have a stop in, but it's only sitting here on your instance, your NinjaTrader environment, and not on the exchange, well then you're sitting there with a trade on that isn't protected. So as far as I'm concerned, you want to leave that unchecked, okay? And then you just add your username and password. Now, when you start getting into CQG is about the same. Well, let's just go through that. Show you here. See, it's exactly the same. Now, when you go into Kinetic or IQ feed, you'll see that you have the option to use back adjusted data. All right, the other data feeds that I showed you, Continuum, CQG, Rhythmic also, they will populate a chart with a continuous contract. And we'll get to those, instrument manager and loading different instruments and editing those instruments, but they'll load a continuous contract, but most of them will not have live data incoming for a continuous contract. As far as I know, the only two that give you the live data for the continuous contracts are IQ feed and Kinetic. And I believe, like I said before, Kinetic is white labeled IQ feed. But I have seen some subtle differences between the two, but I believe actually Kinetic doesn't give you the full saved bid-ask data, but IQ feed does, but Kinetic doesn't. So I think that's the major part where Kinetic is a little bit short of IQ feed, but it's also a lot less expensive. So that's why I'm using it. I don't really need that extra bid-ask data. And the data seems to be, top-notch as far as I can tell. Now, if you select this, then when you're building your continuous contracts, they're going to come in back-adjusted. Okay, what we're talking about with back-adjusted data is eliminating the gap between the rollover. So every month, crude oil will roll over from one contract month to the next month. For something like the ES, it rolls over every 3 months. So when you're rolling every 3 months, you tend to have a little bit larger gap there for the premium, the time decay premium. So that's a little larger between contracts that expire every 3 months than it is for contracts that expire every month. But still, every month in crude oil, you will have that gap at rollover if you're not back adjusting the data. So with back adjusting the data, what they do is they use ratios. And let's say we're going from January to the February contract in crude. When we add that February contract, they're going to use a ratio, and they're going to backfill all of the previous month's data. Okay, and they're going to fill that gap, and I'll show you what I mean when we start getting into the instruments and the charts, but they use a precise ratio to make that gap essentially non-existent. And with that, all of the previous month's data will then be skewed relative to the merging of those contracts to eliminate the gap. So when you're back adjusting the data and you're going back from 1 month's contract to the previous, to the previous, to the previous, you're getting further and further and further every contract. You're getting further away from truly traded prices. So the further you go back in time, the worse that skew becomes as you start piling in, several contracts. You start splicing all those contracts together. So the reason this is important for us with Trade the Plane is because our main focus is market geometry. And with the market geometry, as far as I can tell, and I've been testing this for at least a few months, well, let's see, it's been about 5 months since we really started discussing this. And this is mostly, you'll see it affecting the larger time frames mostly. Okay, because the larger the time frame, the larger the potential that you're actually moving across multiple months, especially on a daily or a weekly chart. And I'll show you some examples of that when we get into it here. But with the market geometry, from what I can tell, you want to prefer non-back adjusted data as opposed to back adjusted data. But the way to be able to do both is to use Kinetic or IQ Feed, and to unselect this box. Okay? Unselect this box, and then all of your continuous contracts will not be back adjusted. And then I'll show you, by default, it's already set up this way, so you won't have to change anything, but I'll show you when we go into the Control Center properties how to set up the tools, options, data feed to merge back adjust all of your front month contracts. So if I were to load right now the CL02-17 contract, the February 2017 contract, and I were to load 200 days, it's going to splice and merge all of those contracts together. And if I select to merge back adjust, it's going to backfill with ratios and adjust and get rid of all of those merging gaps between the two different month contracts, okay? So now, once that's done and you have not selected this box and you go through, it's just a matter of sealing the deal and then coming back and File, Connect, and select the data feed that you've just set up. And you'll see it. If everything is working correctly, it'll be green. If it's not, it'll be orange or red, and it'll say something like not connected or error or something. And that would be most likely due to an improper username or password.